African History Colonial Administration in Egypt under Lord Cromer 1883–1913. Colonial Administration in Egypt under Lord Cromer 1883–1913. Lord Cromer was a British administrator in Egypt from 1883–1907. He belonged to Barling family that had loaned a lot of money to Khedive Ismail. To the British he was considered as a first-class administrator judging from his reputation achievements on behalf of Britain. Africans, particularly the Egyptians, considered him as the strongest example of European imperialists due to his exploitative policies he employed in the administration of Egypt. African scholars add that if Egypt benefited from his schemes, then it was accidental and not by design, as he mainly aimed at exploiting the Egyptian resources. During his administration, Crommer's task was basically Egypt's financial bankruptcy and wanted to pay her financial debts. Crommer was able to achieve this through reorganization of Egyptian accounts and finance ministry. Secondly, he increased agricultural productive capacity of Egypt, and the annual Egyptian revenue rose from £4.5 million to £11.5 million during his regime. Because of the above economic reforms, Egypt was able to depend on her economic resources throughout Crommer's regime. Egypt was also able to pay her interest rate, and by 1906 she had reduced her debts by £10 million. In addition to this, Lord Cromer organised a highly efficient and dedicated civil service and judiciary that helped him to implement British policies in colonial Egypt. As a result of this, a lot of revenue was raised and Cromer was able to offset the Egyptian debt burden of Britain. Many economic projects were undertaken in Suez. Canal business was well managed and its incomes contributed in paying back the borrowed money from Europe. In his reign, irrigation schemes and agricultural sector improved tremendously. He achieved this through the construction of a Swanhide dam that enabled the storage of large quantities of water for irrigation. Its work began in 1848 and was completed in 1902 at a total cost of £3.5 million. Seasonal cropping was replaced by perennial cultivation and constant famine visits were done away with. The total yields from cotton and sugarcane crops more than tripled in 10 years' time. After this period, Egypt was able to entirely depend on the export of cotton. E.g., in 1912, cotton alone accounted for 80% annual income of Egyptian exports. It's from these achievements that one can conclude that Lord Crommer's administration in Egypt was a success. However, from Afrocentric scholars' point of observation, Crommer was considered as an exploiter of Egyptian resources. E.g., he discouraged the development of industrialization by promoting processing industries and discouraging manufacturing sector. This scheme of industrialization was begun by Muhammad Ali and all his African History Colonial Administration in Egypt under Lord Cromer 1883–1913. Construction began later, which clarified that the stopping for importation of coal clearly meant the discouragement of manufacturing industries in his government. He is also blamed to have discouraged the tobacco industries. He did this by imposing heavy fines and penalties to the smokers and eventually discouraged its market. Tobacco producers also paid heavy fines once caught. Admittedly, Crommer also made Egypt recover from financial bankruptcy. However, the Egyptians have accused him of the failure to pay off the entire Egyptian debt worldwide during his administration. It was only after Egypt had its independence in the 20th century that the debt had to be paid off at the faster rate. Crommer also successfully ran the affairs of Suez Canal. However, this was the interest of Europeans and not Egyptians. The ownership of Suez Canal had fallen in foreign hands, and all revenue collected from it was drained out of Egypt. It is said that around £1.5 million annually went to Britain as dividends to foreign shareholders of International Suez Canal Company, and yet throughout his regime, Crommer was silent about this. It is again believed that from 1880 to 1936 Egypt didn't receive a single penny on its original investment of about £60 million in the construction of the Suez Canal. This was the highest degree of modern thievery. He also discouraged Western education by charging very high school fees on the Egyptian and giving very little grants to the education sector. He spent only 1.5% of the total national budget on education, hence promoted illiteracy. Even the education he planned was not properly carried out. Education was left in the hands of Egyptian nationalists to organize it at their own expense. Crommer argued that Western education was bad in Egypt as it would cause nationalistic movements against British rule. He believed that Egypt needed only education in vernacular for the masses. He also supported secondary education that would produce sufficient number of Egyptians to do lower-grade clerical work, e.g., office messengers, secretaries, etc., to support the colonial government. He, for example, had intense hatred for university institutions. The law school and schools of medicine and engineering that were begun by Ismail were all neglected. He can also be blamed for having lacked the Africanization principle of Egyptian civil service. Much as he established an efficient administration, it was British-oriented other than Africa. The ministries of finance, justice, education, army and police were all staffed in senior posts by British nationals. The number of British officials in Egypt rose from 286 in 1896 to 662 to 1906. Egyptians were employed as junior workers and Egyptian civil survived despite of having a well-educated Egyptian group that had received education from Europe and some others from Egypt. It should be noted that by the end of Crommer's rule, British colonial rule had become established in Egypt with its exploitative policies. Egyptians had totally lost their independence.